Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, I am your intrepid Zoomer host, AE, and today I am joined by Mr. Fritz Imperial, who has long been a lurker in our sphere. Been here for a long time, actually, since the Sargon era, so a veteran, if you will. And without that further ado, Mr. Fritz, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I had a nice steak topped with brie cheese. I was gonna post it, but I ate it already. So
Excellent. Yes, I just had our roast beef, mac and cheese, and some mashed potatoes, which is pretty good.
hmm
So
I'm
we're
trying to
trying
get more on
to,
a I'm trying to get onto a keto diet, but I'm cheating with buying a little bit of like a nice cheese every week and whole wheat buns. So that should be fine. But
definitely.
nice thing
Trying to
about
stay off
keto is,
that.
yeah,
Trying to stay
they
off that
say.
goy slop.
Yeah, I know. I've really been going on a culinary journey of teaching myself how to cook a lot. I've even been doing a lot of recipes for Christmas. I got the Elder Scrolls official cookbook, and they have a lot of really good recipes in it. Like I had made some red guard rice earlier this week. I had they have a good lamb recipe. They've got like a really nice scalloped bacon uh, recipe in there. I tried the grilled leeks. I didn't it didn't turn out that good, but um, it has expanded my horizons. I am thinking of actually at some point when I get around to like I want to do some cleaning up and reorganizing of my kitchen, but I'd love to like do some cooking videos once in a while.
Definitely. Well, our audience isn't here for a cooking channel. They can go visit Mr. Beast for that type of normie content. They're here for they're here for the distant take on
Mhm.
politics and philosophy. So, our topic, without delay, is on the legitimacy of the state. And what brought this topic to my interest was there was a conversation on Twitter between a couple of our guys in the dissident right on whether specifically the US regime as it currently stands has to be legitimate, has to have legitimacy in the eyes of its populace in order to rule indefinitely, or if it's the lack of the mandate of heaven, if you will spell its doom in the long run. And some people were on the side of it doesn't need legitimacy, it can just continue on forever and ever, basically. And some people were on the side of, well, once you lose the mandate, any regime will lose power, and the state apparatus that controls will collapse at some point. So I was curious, Mr. Fritz, what are your thoughts on this? Like, kind of what side? What do you think? Does a state
I mean,
have to have legitimacy, specifically in
my
the
thought
U.S.?
is really the idea of like where does the legitimacy come from, and you know honestly, a big part of legitimacy, in my view, is the monopoly of force. That, if you're able to actually enforce your will or enforce, the fact that you are the state, then that does grant you a great degree of legitimacy de facto, regardless of whether or not, you have full legal right. As we've seen, increasingly, the current regime really has no traditional right or any moral right to do most of what it's doing, but it has the authority. It has the authority because it has the power. And the sad truth is that the realist Italian elite theory is that politics is ultimately about power. And
Yes.
so my broader thoughts on that is that you know the U.S. state, the government, the global American empire has a tremendous amount of money. As you were talking to Newsfist yesterday, that they have so much money and they have so much hard power in terms of control over institutions. But the thing is, because the societies that they're trying to run are falling apart before their eyes, um, you have the fact that the soft power that they have and their ability to provide, say, bread and circuses is diminishing. That's kind of eating away at the fact that at their own legitimacy in the eyes of the masses, the plebs, and that's also going to start eating away. There is a limit as to how much hard power you can use or how much legitimacy you have based on force alone, because especially if the woke starts eating away at more and more symbols, if they start saying we can't say anything good about the founding fathers because they were, racist white slave owners, if we can't have the American flag, once they start, ejecting even the basic trappings of the American state and American nation, the regime is really going to start losing its legitimacy in the eyes of the public, especially if what happens. Now, I know this is going on YouTube, so elections are always free and completely transparent in America. 2020 was the most legitimate election in American history. Uh, but the joking aside, if the results of this election really seem to be fortified, I feel like a huge section of the right is just going to become disillusioned. The fact that, especially already, the fact with Trump's conviction that the state doesn't have enough faith in its own, aging meat puppet of a president to think that they can actually win the election, so they have to start arresting their own political opponents. So to wrap up my opening is that the state is definitely losing legitimacy in the eyes of more and more people. People on the right, I think, even a lot of normie conservatives don't think that they don't just think the government's bad. They genuinely think the government is genuinely evil and needs to be overthrown, or at least replaced. The issue is, okay, if you accept the state isn't legitimate, what do you do next?
That is the question that we have in front of us here. But I'm just going to give you a sense of what Red America is feeling. I know you're from more traditional Blue America. So
I'm from a red area of a blue state.
Okay, well, similar enough. So you probably get the similar vibes that I do from the Nori populace. Is they very much view the current U.S. regime as a weakening and illegitimate force in their eyes, even if they don't believe in fortification of the elections. And they view it as actually governing so incompetently at the stage where it's actually affecting them personally. And you see this most fluently expressed in gas prices, food, transportation, like housing costs. Like all these things are becoming like, I mean, just like within my lifetime, gas, for example, went from $1 to now it's $3 a gallon. And for your average like blue collar worker who makes $50,000 to $70,000 a year, well, that really hurts them in the wallet. And as we all know from like the bread and circuses, once like you start removing that, that's when people actually start to do things and they start to get
once
angry.
People's basic ability to live their lives starts becoming compromised and the politics starts becoming close at home, and the fact that the regime also has to consistently keep lying, like just was it yesterday or a couple days ago, the White House press secretary had just said, no, all the videos of Biden stumbling around are just deep fakes, probably by Russian trolls, because everybody is Russian trolls.
I mean, yeah, it's like it's late Soviet Union vibes from these people of just like it's even less incompetent though, because at least you could argue the Soviet bureaucracy and apparatus was still competent enough to maintain the state at least until almost the very end, right? It seems like our regime isn't even that competent in maintaining the current, liberal hegemony of the state. And like you see it in the way these people express their like their talking points, like you said with the press secretary. I think she said in response a couple of days ago to like meat prices going up to like $18 per pound or something with steak and lamb. Oh, well, I don't eat meat, so that's not my problem. Like, I mean, it's stuff like this, and like that really does like open, sort of the normies, like their subconscious thought. Like, even if they're not thinking this consciously about like, oh, these people are fundamentally against my interest, and like they're hostile to me. Actually.
Not only that, but again, it's as you pointed out, they're just so incompetent. Like if it was still like Obama, right? If people remember the Obama era, is everybody hated Obama, everybody on the right, said he was like, you had like the peak boomer memes of him as like Hitler, or him as the socialist dictator and everything. But like quality of life in the U.S. was actually still relatively good. Crime rates were actually still we're at the end of their gradual decline since the 90s, but like now the regime just can't keep up the basic apparatus of having a functioning society to help supplant their own legitimacy. Like, and the fact that, you know, in any gun control debate, like they have to keep resorting to threatening to use the military on civilian militias I think that says something more to their own fear, that they have to keep, you know, saying, hey, we won't hesitate to use the full force of the military on US citizens because we're afraid they're going to rise up.
That's very indicative of like the state of our current elite class, because as we know in the Moscow and Pareto like vision of the elite class, like there you have the lions and then you have the foxes, and the lions are the hard power people. These are your Francos, Mussolini's, you know, the strong men who aren't afraid to use hard power and are like competent at doing so to prop up their state and regime. And then you have the more bureaucratic management, you know, PR people. These are your Justin Trudeau's, Joe Biden's, you know, Macron's, you know, these are the type of people I'm talking about here. And that's who makes up the current like elite class of the West, and especially in America. And as we know from Foxes, from Moscow and Pareto, they're definitely afraid of using hard power because they're not good at it. They're legitimately
They love
not
to
good at it.
fantasize about it, though.
Yes.
Like these people are, I think a lot of them are genuinely insane. Like they love to fantasize, especially like the social media personalities, right? I think they just genuinely fantasize about like the US military gunning down you know, conservative evangelicals. But the thing is, I don't think they could competently run something like that.
No, because here's the duality of our current regime. Like the way they maintain power is obviously promoting through bio-Leninism, right? So they have to remove competent white men from positions in the military, the general staff, like people in the bureaucracy, the Pentagon. And so the only people they're left with who can like being put in these positions are like just the lowest of the low sludge who are going to like question them no matter what. Because the only reason like these like people like the Secretary of Health, that like tranny they put in who looks like a whale. I forgot what his name was.
Rachel Levine.
Yeah,
Rachel. I don't know what his original name is, but
yeah. It's irrelevant. People like Kim, right? Like they're going to be totally loyal to the regime because the only reason they're there is they're loyal to the regime. However, the con of that of late stage empires is that these people are incredibly retarded and incompetent in managing the bureaucracy and things.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think...
I love this. Yeah, an anecdote on this or example is with the war in Ukraine. The fact that the bureaucracy is run by people that literally think war in reality works like a television show. I don't know if my friend Argent Templar he either got it from somebody or it's one of his sayings, is that 90% of, or 90 to 95% of what liberals believe is something they got from television. Because like they released a whole trailer for like the Ukraine counteroffensive of last year, and like apparently earlier this year, like Zelensky and like was said like he said the reason why the counteroffensive failed is because it got leaked, when they literally released a trailer and were boasting about exactly where and how they were going to attack the Russian lines. But people think that, oh, this has to work like a Marvel movie. So like, you know, the people that we designate as the bad guys just lose. Like they can't comprehend that life doesn't, or reality doesn't work like that because they're not realists.
No, and they're the exact opposite. And I think there's also a component to this where like they have full control over Hollywood. So they're kind of like high on their own supply, if you will, where they actually genuinely believe this is how the world works. It's like
I haven't seen a Marvel movie in, like, speaking of, just an example or just a tangent on that. It's like I haven't seen a Marvel movie in since like 2012. I don't like them, or like 2012, 2013. But I always kind of get a creepy vibe from it that like the Avengers is basically just like a, you know, an NGO that is subservient to NATO or the UN. And it's like, we have these, supermen that have no allegiance to actual countries, even Captain America, not really. And we will not hesitate to use them to kill our political enemies. Like, I'm surprised something like that hasn't happened yet in one of the, where they just have an explicit, like, right-wing MAGA villain, and they have the Avengers team up to kill him and all his supporters.
Well, I think they did this. I think they did something similar to that when they. I know bringing up cringe names isn't very great, but like an example I could think of is like when they called Jordan Peterson Red Skull in the comics, right? And they basically turned Red Skull into Jordan Peterson. This was how cringe we were back then. As the first example of a right-wing fascist, essentially, and like in the comics, like he's just having a conversation with like the Chuds, right? And it's basically it's along the lines of like the regime like hates you. You can't afford a house. You can't get a
Doesn't it
wife.
show how petty they are too?
Yes, it really does.
Like they have all this hard power, but the way they actually use it is, we're gonna make fun of you in a comic. Because they already do use their power to fire people, dox people, and all of that. But like to really make a show of it is, they're not gonna just go out and start eliminating alt F4ing, MAGA supporters outright. They have to put it in a comic. I mean, that was from years ago, so who knows what they would do now, but they are getting increasingly desperate.
No, and as we know from like regimes and late stage empires, the closer you get to the regime actually losing powers when they actually get the most tyrannical and most like willing to use hard power to like maintain whatever vestiges they have still in the state. But I think back to what I was saying there about the legitimacy question is they'll do stuff like that. These like liberals and like you mentioned the counteroffensive, like, and obviously the war in Ukraine is a catastrophe, which I hate for many reasons. However, these are the same people who like will cheer for the death of like Russian soldiers while their Ukrainian proxies, so called, will go out there and like capture a Russian soldier and then like fucking like skin him alive and have a gay pride flag, and they'll call this justice, essentially, right? And like how this is a great example of democracy in action.
In proxy, they're punishing their political enemies.
Exactly, and that's what they would like to do to us. Like every time you see them talk about Russia, substitute that word Russia for Red America, essentially. Because that's the bloodlust these people actually have. However, like I said, they're foxes, so they're incompetent at using hard power. And it doesn't mean they're not dangerous. Yes, exactly.
Which, they're not corner. They're more like a fox with rabies, or that like it doesn't know what it's doing, or it doesn't really know how to be effective anymore. So it's just kind of lashing out.
No, and we really see that when they just like target random people. Just like random red Americans who like post on Twitter. I think that guy like posted a meme from 2016 about Hillary Clinton, and like 8 years later, the DOJ is like targeting him and arresting him and putting him in prison. Like stuff like this, it's completely like asymmetrical, just like random stuff the regime is doing nowadays, and like that just is not the hallmark of a competent regime. Like, say what you want about the Bushes, but there's no way a Bush administration, I'm more thinking of like Bush Sr. here, like the Bush administration was very much competent. It would not do stuff like this in the open, like signal like its actual intent and motivation.
Well, it didn't even really need to, because
it didn't need to do
you
so.
had the material prosperity, and like you had faith in the system. You had enough faith in the system that it was working fine, that you didn't have an increasing number of people questioning it, and that didn't scare them, obviously. I think they are like, I remember this, and this is something our mutual friend Dave the Distributus kind of said to me back in 2016, kind of when I first met him, is that what would have actually almost been scarier than Trump getting elected is if Red America just said, we don't believe in the legitimacy of the state, so none of us are voting. We're just gonna have huge bonfires and burn all of our ballot tickets and say we don't believe the state's legitimate. They wouldn't even have to do any violence, but it would scare the shit out of the government.
I've heard him say similar things too, and I very much agree with him on that point. But I think getting off the tangent there, I was saying like the way you know the regime is in very much steep decline at this stage is like the regime is actually there. It's like sort of the Smoltbuckian idea,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like when you're seeing the machine in action, it's already in decline because when it's competent, it's obscured, right? There's so many things there where you don't notice it, but when you're actually starting to notice it, is
It's like a
actually
duck,
when
right?
yeah.
It's like a duck where, on the surface it looks like a duck is incredibly graceful, just just gliding through the water, but it's pedaling really, really rapidly underneath. And now you can actually start seeing that, and you can see, oh, the duck is literally dying and is getting nibbled away at by fish underwater, and has a broken leg.
And that's very much an analogous to the current state of our regime, and I'm not exactly sure where I am on this point, of like where how far decline is going to have to go before like things actually get bad enough where we see things change.
Well, that's the issue, is that with the fall of the Roman Empire, there's the fact that there was some form of a replacement, the fact in the form of Gothic and Vandal and Hunnic invaders. Like, there has to be something. The regime is, if there was some, like, the regime would pretty rapidly start collapsing if there was enough support, if there was a clear enough rival to it that was just, if you had just some random warlord saying, yeah, I'm going to lower taxes, I'm going to stop illegal immigration, I'm going to stop all the woke stuff, I'm actually going to have some competency, people would flock to that. Like, you could see how quickly the Roman Republic shifted into being completely okay with a dictator like Caesar and then later Octavian. Just because they were the people that said, I'm going to stop the corruption, I'm going to restore order, I'm going to restore prosperity.
No, people crave like order, justice, like
Mm-hmm.
morality. When you have
And
just mass chaos and rampant
mm,
degeneracy, like
and I guess that's the criticism we'd have of the classical liberals, or like the people that worship the Constitution, is the fact that we've said it a million times, but the Constitution was explicitly written for a specific people in a specific place and time. The fact that the founding fathers really weren't worried about needing a national church, not only because, well, you had a bunch of different Protestant sects in America already. So, but in the fact that, well, 99% of the population are already practicing Christians, we don't really need to enshrine this into law. And like, you can largely have a fairly hands-off government if you're early 19th century America. Obviously, we don't live in that time period anymore, or we don't have that country anymore.
no, and I think Dave made a great point about this. Even if like people believed in the Constitution on a mass scale, the Supreme Court and justice system, which actually enforces the edicts, right, of the Constitution, doesn't believe in the Constitution, so it's a mute point. Those are the
And
people
really,
that actually
America
enforce
hasn't
this stuff.
operated strictly on the Constitution since the Civil War. And that's kind of where the start of the eroding of the legitimacy kind of comes into place. The fact that, the Civil War was a very clear example of the government saying, okay, this whole thing where anything not explicitly said in the Constitution is left up to the states. We're making an exception in the case of, say, of like slavery, and in the case of states trying to leave the Union. It's we will use everything in the federal government's power to stop this. And that forever kind of broke the concept that states have any sort of authority over the federal government.
No, that kind of was the death knell in many ways of like the autonomy and like model the founders envisioned for all the various like states of the country being like almost semi-independent in the way they govern themselves in their local politics instead of this like overreaching just a large centralized bureaucracy that dictates everything from DC.
and the FBI going from, oh, we investigate high profile crimes to essentially just being the secret police, like becoming indistinguishable. Or they're like the Stasi without the cool uniforms.
They're like the rainbow Stasi, if you will, with
Mhm.
like rainbows and like fat
I
black
think,
women.
just the other
Essentially.
day they had the fact that they like two feds came to a doctor who was trying to debunk or was criticizing gender ideology in children, and the feds have to come and intimidate them.
No, yeah, like I was saying earlier, like when a regime is just doing that random stuff, that you could tell it's members of the managerial class are of subpar quality,
Mm-hmm.
like subpar, and it's only getting worse here. Because again, as like Dave and various other people have said, they're theater kids. They're people who have inherited like companies, fortunes, positions of power, NGOs, political families, and like they're just like lower quality, degraded people. They're not aristocrats. They're theater kids who attended Harvard, MIT programs and have a bachelor's in liberal arts degree and are a fervent progressive, essentially. And that's who these people are.
Mm-hmm. And it's as we've said before, they just have no ability to actually run things competently, unlike the boomer white men that they all ousted or are retiring. Like, if we think the issues with like the planes falling apart now is going to get bad, wait until like the real mass retirements of the boomers start in the next couple of years.
No, I think I remember seeing something on Twitter where it's like every year 2 million baby boomers die off. And obviously, we have many criticisms of the baby boomers, but like, you got to admit that, like, no offense, when you look at my generation and some younger millennials,
They were at
like,
least competent in running.
yeah, like you could, like, I'll give you a great example. If you were stopped by the road and you had a flat tire, you couldn't trust a young person anymore who would help you fix that. Like, they probably wouldn't even know how to fix that, or they probably wouldn't even stop for you. So you wouldn't even really trust them with that kind of stuff. And that's who makes up the majority of the younger generations. But beyond that, like, we're facing, obviously, and I got to word this delicately for YouTube, like cultural enrichment from
Mm-hmm.
Southern Hemisphere on a mass scale, which is demography changing the country forever. And that's obviously a massive issue there. And that's an entirely different populace and culture that is foreign to us. And
And
that's kind of
has no loyal, because they don't even need to become citizens anymore, legal or otherwise. They have zero loyalty to except towards any culture or country, save for the thing that's going to give them the most handouts.
Exactly. And it almost sort of reminds me of the late stage Roman Empire, especially the West, right? Where you had like towards the end these like puppet emperors of like just like warlords and essentially, and they would just like let in German barbarians to like fight their wars for them in exchange.
I mean, if you just saw the news, Seattle is now going to allow DACA recipients to become law enforcement officers. So people that are criminal illegal aliens, are now going to be law enforcement officers, even though I thought the police were evil and racist. So,
Well, yeah, there you go. And like obviously, now they're talking about giving these people amnesty on a mass scale, and that's just open demographic change right there of the current electorate and populace of America for political gain. And that's what these people are essentially. Like, I forgot you said this, but like when you look at the voting patterns, like Democrats have not won the majority of the white vote since like 2012 or something along those lines. So if the country was still like 1950s populace of like 90% white, these people would not be winning elections on the mass scale.
the electoral map of, if you see like even like think Reagan's second term or Nixon's second term, where he wins every state except for
Massachusetts and DC.
Yeah, like show that to any like normie Republican and say, why is this not possible anymore? Why is it always like you win by basically a handful of electoral votes.
And these people legitimately, when you bring up a good point like that, these people will just say, well, we're not the same, and like the Democrats are too far left or something along those lines. Like they don't even have the conception of an ethnos, like, or like spiritual base to the country anymore. And as we've seen, like with some other people on the right, like now it's become like we're going to welcome in minorities as long as they're racist, essentially, like type of the idea, right? We're just going to welcome in this like change as long as you're racist, essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, that's not a way to win in the long run.
Or it's kind of like, I guess, among some like Catholic Twitter users or some morons in the Catholic sphere, it's like, well, we're just going to invite all the Latin Americans to come in to make America a Latino Catholic country. But no, the Latinos all become either progressive secularists or they become evangelicals. Like, they're a large number of them are not like carrying on their Catholic faith, and really that is not a morally correct way to want to make America, to evangelize America. And I say this as a WASP because I am a descendant. Would be considered a heritage American. Like, most of my ancestry does date from England or before the Revolution. But I'm also a Catholic convert. Like, I still have an ethnic and cultural identity with America.
Yeah, you still have the concept of ethnos here, and like I don't have the concept of ethnos with like Mexicans or like Guatemalans. Like that just is a fundamental disconnect, and like you'll never have that. That will never work. This like John Lennon's Imagine, oh, just imagine, endless diversity, we all get along. It's been proven to be a lie since it was created. Yet it's still the founding mythos of the progressive left, and like no matter what, they're going to steer
the
the
idea that
train.
America doesn't have a native culture, or doesn't have America for a long time. Like, it was pretty well understood that this was like an Anglo-Protestant country.
It was for most of its history until you get to like 1965 with the Hart-Celler Act and like the New Dealers, especially dismantling that, getting rid of the Walter McCarran Act previously, which limited immigration to like only, I believe it was 1 million per year, and they could only be from like Western European countries. Where assimilation, even then, like assimilation has never really worked.
It's worked for certain groups. Like, post World War II, Catholics really did kind of become pretty well integrated into the broader American society. I think largely just because, having gone through the war, and also the Cold War, anti-communism being kind of a unifying force of Protestants and Catholics against it, did kind of help out. And the fact that you had such a huge number of Irish, Italian, German, Polish descended Catholics in America living here, making up such a significant percentage of the population at that point. But that was demographic, cultural change brought about by mass immigration. So there you go.
And that was what the America Firsters and the isolationists of the 1920s and 30s were all about. It's not that like, they didn't consider these people to be like kin in terms of the greater European family. It's the fact they recognize that America is inherently an Anglo Protestant country. Even if you bring in these people like the Germans, for example, right? The Germans can assimilate. However, like their genes aren't just going to magically transform like and like some symbiosis of like becoming Anglos overnight. Like there's a fundamental like difference in terms of biology and culture. Like even if they become American, there's still going to be some difference there. And that's what the like America Firsters critique was of allowing people like just to come in the border as long as they'll work for cheap wages. And that was the big issue with the Irish actually coming in as well, because they were obviously Catholics and they would work undercompete the Anglos in terms of the factory jobs, which were the main like way you would make a living in early like 18th century, 19th century America. And that was the big critique of immigration back then, and we're seeing that continue on nowadays. However, Now it's become just like an open weapon against like whitey, essentially.
That,
Now
and
it's
also
like
it's not even it's not helping the economy either.
no, and it hasn't
Because
since
you
the
don't have high,
1970s.
you're not bringing in really high skilled people, or you're the masses. This is another thing that kind of has to do with the legitimacy of the regimes. The fact that, like, their arguments for mass immigration, it's like, well, they do the jobs people don't want, is then basically admitting, the only way we can conceive of our economy working is if we have a permanent huge brown underclass. Because we can't conceive of, because we have to rewrite history to say that, like, no white person ever did manual labor.
No, essentially, which is such a like retarded conception of history. And obviously, like these people's like ideas are having severe consequences. Going back to legitimacy here, like obviously, like people just recognize that like these things are all blatant lies. Unless you're like just a pure ideologue like Vaush or like one of these other like bad actors right on the left who are just going to show for it no matter what. Like the normies, the working class, white working class, blue collar people, like they see this for what it is. Like it's to undercut their wages, to remove their political power, and like they're starting to recognize that like these people actually just hate me. This is like this is deliberate. Like this isn't like some radical right wing talking point. And like they're seeing that like, oh yeah, these people, the state which I've supported all my life, like it hates me. Like there's something wrong here, right? Even if the normie doesn't understand exactly what, he is conceptualizing that something is very much fundamentally wrong, and I'm seeing that become more evident in the zeitgeist.
And I suppose that's kind of like where potential solutions come in, is the fact that I kind of just see the role of the dissident right, or whatever we want to call ourselves, is really our number one target is trying to break into the minds of normie conservatives, showing them, look, the system just isn't working, and it's beyond just get a Republican president in there. Like, things are never going to go back to the 90s. Like, I think there's even the idea that, I know there's the great conflict between Orrin McIntyre and Academic Agent, the whole idea of putting the woke away, is that the regime at this point is too incompetent to do that. Even though, like, it would be the most rational decision to try and appeal more, to try and move to the center again, but they just can't.
No, like the progressive can't control its like vanguard, essentially, if you want to put it in those like,
Or even that they can't, as we've seen with the Israel-Palestine conflict lately, it's ripped, it's torn apart the activist and elite class. The elite class is, of course, the people in the State Department are just fully 110% behind Israel, but you have all these largely non-white, non-American, or people
the
who have
new arrivals, yes.
new arrivals, who obviously have no connection to, like, I guess at this point, somewhat historic American support for Israel, going back to, post World War II. They have no connection to that, and they don't see, for them, like, regardless of what all the conservative commentators want to say, these people don't hate Jews. They hate Israelis because they see Israelis as white colonizers.
Yes, and that's a very interesting fault line that has emerged that some people like
That
Aaron
you have the
McIntyre pointed
activist
out.
class against the managerial class.
Yes, and I say let them fight. The more our enemies fight, is the better it is for us.
But so many conservatives just can't help themselves. They couldn't help themselves, but going like, no, we need to send in the police to shut down these protests. Get rid of these woke protesters just being against Israel.
Yes, I remember this actually with Ted Cruz in like Texas A&M. Actually, I think it was UTC Austin actually, where he basically sent in the police to like arrest these Palestinian protesters at UC Austin, but he didn't send them in when they were protesting against white people or against like heritage American interest. No. We're gonna send the police and then use force if it's for a client group that supports us, right? Financially, like culturally, these people. And there's just that massive disconnect right there, and like it's like becoming very distasteful and like very obvious to people what's going on here.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's hard to ignore it when you have APAC just on this. I know this is treading very thin ice here for YouTube, but when APAC literally just boasts about how they control both parties or how all the candidates that they back win, kind of makes people like it's starting to it's too obvious for even some normies to ignore.
Like again, I'll say it here and I'll say it again. They can't help themselves.
No.
And like obviously like that's going to be a major problem for these people because they can't maintain the Zionist narrative because the populations they're importing fundamentally don't believe in it. Number one, they don't have the historical reference point or the faith backgrounds like Protestant, like evangelical Christianity
I
that
think especially that hurts them
facilitates that
because
worldview.
one of the greatest supporter, probably one, yeah, in America, the two greatest supporters of Israel are the State Department and white evangelicals. And obviously white evangelicals are basically everything that both the new arrivals and progressive activists hate more than anything. So obviously if they associate, well, they love Israel, so we obviously have to love Palestine.
No, yeah, these are your like Christo-fascist type of people crowd, like the like Christian nationalists, if you want to think of them like that. The normie cons.
Yeah. The thing with Christian nationalism is that like I've always just kind of associated it with like slightly edgier white evangelicals. Like I associate it with like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who I don't think is particularly intelligent. But like and it's also, I think, another thing Distributus made the point of is that we have to have all these names for things that people used to just call normal. Like the Christian understanding of his relation to politics would, for like 1900 years, be considered Christian nationalism.
No, yeah, he made that great point actually on Twitter after he was debating one of these guys. I forgot which one it was who was attacking that idea. That like we're so deracinated and decoupled from what like Western civilization and like what Christianity used to be. We're having to have like debates and defend like basic truths and ideas. Now we're at that stage of like deconstruction, postmodernism, where
Yeah, the most, like, we have these like revolutionary new ideas, which is just what our grandparents believed in.
no, and that's like that's a very bad sign. That's a signal that like the civilization like coil is unraveling here at quite a rapid pace, and that kind of goes back into the like the legitimacy of the state, where it's like people recognize that we have bad leadership, that they're running things into the ground here, like, and that they're fundamentally not believing in the state. Like, this is why again and again Americans, when you like ask them, like heritage Americans here, that needs to be cited, not new arrivals, like their opinion of like the House, Congress, like the ruling bureaucracy is in the single digits to negative here. And it's been that way consistently when you
Yeah,
ask them.
I think the bigger question has to be asked is, so why do you keep voting for these people?
Yes, and that's the bigger problem is they still fundamentally believe in the civic religion of America.
Yes.
That's a bigger issue.
Europe, you even have the same thing of like, I really like, I think Morgoth has been very behind the whole zero seats movement of, the UK is having their election on a general election in July. And like, the aim is that because obviously the Tories have completely lied to all their constituents and betrayed them every chance they get, like they don't even care, like actual conservatives or right-wing people in the UK don't even care if Reform Party doesn't win or that the Labour government's gonna almost certainly take power. It's more about, I think they're using it right, of just, we're voting against the Tories just because they stifled any actual conservative movement in the UK. Like every time they said we'll stop the boats, they obviously didn't. Like, when the fact that you have an island nation that can't defend its own borders and refuses to do that, obviously it's being done intentionally. And it's the same thing with the whole Just Stop Oil protests, right? If you see, this just happened today, is They threw orange paint on Stonehenge, and it's like these people will go into these museums looking obviously suspicious, not get checked by security at all, carrying huge paint cans, and then go in and deface an entire, a priceless work of art. And you won't see any police trying to tackle them or guard security trying to stop them. Everybody just kind of stands back and watches. And the fact is that the regime, for whatever reason, they're just like, we're not going to stop them from doing this, even though we could.
No, it kind of reminds me actually of like the Summer of Love type of thing, where like it was exposed that like these mass protests, quote unquote, were receiving money from NGOs. They were receiving like they were literally like would drop off like piles of bricks for these people, and like the police would not intervene.
You're talking about the 2020 Summer of Love,
yes,
right?
yes, 2020 Summer of Love.
Because there was a whole bunch of rioting that I wouldn't be surprised if the same thing happened like that in the 60s.
And the same thing happened with Chaz too. If we were going back even a little bit more too, where like the state literally like gave them free food, free medicine, free porta potties to support their like supposedly communist anarcho state in central like Seattle here. And that's just basic like friend enemy distinction, like openly, like if you have an IQ above like a potato here, which apparently is lacking with most normies nowadays.
I mean, the question is though, is like, yes, normies are, average intelligence. The myth that we really have to bury the myth of populism. Like the ordinary red Americans are never going to quote unquote rise up, because that doesn't happen. No, like any riot or any revolution has to have a vanguard. It has to have organized leadership. And I think that's been what's kind of talked about. Is one theory is like what we kind of need is to try and convince some of the super rich, like get more people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, of just trying to convince the remaining competent CEOs that obviously this system is not working, and you have like there's nothing in your self-interest to continue to do this.
Yes, and I think that's a very interesting avenue for us to explore, even though I very much have my critiques of Peter Thiel. I do think there's very interesting stuff going on with the PayPal mafia, sort of types where they're like funding these interesting candidates like Blake Masters in Arizona, who are openly talking about deporting all illegals in America and stopping the infinite NGO immigration machine, essentially. Like how also like these types are like, they can't be removed for political reasons because they're too important for the system.
They also have too much
power.
Money.
Yeah, that too, obviously.
There's the term "fuck you" money, and this is kind of that on a much bigger scale. Of like, you can't make Elon Musk go away because he has more money than you.
Yes, I believe he's the richest man in the world right now, or he's like the second one. It depends on which day of the week you're looking at the number. But like the fact remains, like, you have to have elite support for things to fundamentally change. It's always going to be that way. Like, there's no populist movements, with very few exceptions in all of history, without elite support.
You even go back to the American Revolution. Like, the founding fathers were the kind of were the well-educated, wealthy men in America at the time. It wasn't just ordinary people that were just. I mean, the war was fought by them, but they had to be organized and led that way by elites.
Yeah, they were organized by the land-owning aristocracy, essentially, right? Who controlled the farmland and pre-industrial America, essentially. These weren't like people who worked at like, the bar or tavern as like a server or a bartender. You know what I mean? Those are not the types that lead the revolution. And I'll go back to a famous example to further elaborate my point. Like, again, Vladimir Lenin in the year 1916 or 1917 was sent to Russia with a gold train by the German Kaiser in order to destabilize the Russian Empire. There's a reason the Bolshevik Revolution succeeded. And number one, it was because Lenin garnered elite support. He garnered the support of the German government, various Western intellectuals, and like finance from J.P. Morgan and Central Bank and many banks of Central Europe and Vienna. Like, again, if he did not have those things, his revolution would not have succeeded, in my opinion.
In addition, certain fascist leaders, even though like I think both of them, the Austrian mustachioed man and the Italian bald guy, okay, Hitler and Mussolini. Sorry, I can say their names.
Yeah.
I have to say I can't tell you how much I hate the whole we have to dance around certain words. It really makes me mad. Like it's childish and it's
theater kid rule.
Mm-hmm. It's little kids like trying not to say bad words. They say, "Well, you're a poopy head," and saying you're a dickhead. But, anyways, like even though Hitler was not an elite in any real stretch of the imagination, he was a nobody. He got massive support from the elite classes based on the idea of like, okay, this is the only person that's charismatic enough to at least, to be able to be the face of a movement to stop communism, which is really why people largely turned to fascism. Partly it was, disillusionment with liberalism, which again goes to the point of legitimacy, right? Is the reason why the democratic Italian government, why the Weimar Republic fell. It's because you had an alternative that seemed legitimate enough that was speaking to people's actual concerns. Now, I'm not going to say I certainly have my criticisms of those governments, but not just the Weimar Republic, but Nazi Germany as well. But the point being is that the reason why they were actually able to collapse is the fact that you had a strong enough force in opposition to it that was seen by the public as a suitable enough replacement.
Yes, that like was going to, in the metaphor of entropy, push the boulder uphill. That like the Weimar Republic was pushing downhill at such a rapid rate. Where you're like, I'll go a bit edgy here. Like, again, there's a reason we saw the birth of transgenderism in Weimar Germany, like mass prostitution, mass degeneracy, like the morale and like advanced civilization of the German Empire, like just decaying in front of everybody's eyes, and like material conditions just getting absolutely worse for the average working class man, right? With the depression and like just incompetent management of the bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm.
And we're facing similar things in the current West right now. And I'm not going to say like that's what's going to happen here because history doesn't repeat; it rhymes, as somebody said on Twitter. However, that does like lay the conditions forward for a regime change, the winds of change, if you will, to where like the average condition of the working class man is to get to the point where like they have nothing to lose. That's
not
when
only that, but again, being the point is there has to be a visible, very clear, strong, and vibrant opposition. Which I think the seeds have been. I think a lot of the seeds have been sown by the dissident right. They just have to be cultivated, and there has to be some kind of unifying, visible and vibrant movement for people to get behind that has elite backing, that has organization, that's not a populist movement.
Yes, exactly. And I think like we're seeing that change like take fold within my lifetime. Like how I got introduced into this movement was with All Right 1.0 and the various issues there. And I've seen the necessary corrections from the lessons we took from Charlottesville and that kind of populist movement under Trump, to where it's kind of like, no, we actually need elite theory here, and we need aristocrats to take over again. That's what we actually need for things to fundamentally change, and that's kind of why, like, the PayPal mafia has become a popular term among us, like, kind of the study of these, like, dissident elites and, like, how we can cultivate, tens, if you will, because that's what's ultimately going to change our situation here. It's not going to be, like, getting all of Oklahoma to rise up against the federal government. That's a pipe dream, and that's not how reality works. And I think like we've all accepted that as reality at this point. There's not going to be this great awakening where everybody like in Red America just picks up their AR-15 and marches on DC, and that's how the empire falls. That's just not
The
how it
silent
works.
majority was called the silent majority for a reason, even though, like, at least back in the 70s, the solid majority of Americans were these kind of quiet, well-to-do, fairly conservative people. They weren't going to, they weren't going to rise up, or they weren't going to be as vocal as the, small minority of the loudmouthed hippie activists. And that's kind of why they ultimately lost, or the fact that, why those were successful, because they weren't just kind of the great mass of people. They had elite back behind them and intellectuals.
Yes, they had people at Harvard, like Ohio State, MIT, and like various like American elites who back their ideas,
Mm-hmm.
who
And
back like civil
another
rights.
tangent is, like, you want to really think about degenerate and like horrifying left-wing ideas. Like, even in the 60s, a lot of what they believed was still shocking. Would have shocked us today. Like, I can't look at a hippie but without having a seething rage.
No, people think that
They
like
were genuinely awful people.
no, they genuinely were like, and these people were like are legitimately like a cancer, like that like legitimately took root in like a very healthy and moral society and just like ate the roots of it essentially, and like rotted its corpse, right? Like hollowing out a tree essentially.
It was less people that were like these pacifist hippies, and you did at the same time the exact same mentality as where you got people like Charles Manson and a lot of like, murderous cults at the time. Like the Jim Jones cult which again resulted in the death of like almost 1,000 people.
Was a communist inspired
Was a
movement,
communist inspired. Like, they even, when they were weighing their options of when the feds were going to come and get rid of them, they were like, why don't we just like flee to Russia or flee to the Soviet Union? There's even funny thing of like two of Jim Jones' surviving children, because he had what was called a rainbow family, where he adopted like 8 different children.
He
of, like,
was the
races.
proto progressive you think of today.
Yes. And even then, like, his children that he adopted from like all these different races, DEI and adoption, like none of the family members like actually felt like they were legitimate children, not just because they were adopted, but because like they were adopted specifically because, well, I want to have a Native American, I want to have an Asian, I want to have a black kid. So even in that case, and then of course it ends the fact that Jim Jones wasn't even really a religious person, or I don't even think he believed in God at the end. But that's where like these ideas take you. Like, I was thinking about this, is that it's like people think, oh, if you're a Machiavellian or if you're like a political realist, like, you can look at somebody like Bismarck or think like, well, they kind of seem a bit crude and brutish and like cold and calculating. At the same time, like, really, it's the political idealists that end up committing the mass atrocities because they refuse to actually believe in and understand reality.
No, they fundamentally believe that they can change reality, like we are like gods, and that's why they committed like a genocide against the kulaks in Russia, why they murdered millions of Christian Russians because they were enemies of the revolution, or like in revolutionary France, right? They murdered just like innocent people for
what legitimacy did they have, or them preaching about liberty when they marched innocent nuns up to their death?
No, those are the same people. You think they're different. Like, there's nothing new under the sun, my friend. Like, these are the same people who govern us right now. They're just more
Physiognomy as
incompetent.
well. Like, physiognomy has its, like, you look at a picture of like Robespierre and Marat, like they look they look how you think they would if you believe in physiognomy.
Yes, they're dysgenic freaks who would be nothing in like an ordinary moral society. They would be nobodies. But now, because we live under this like insane like progressive regime, like the gay Soviet Union, basically, they're elevated to positions of extreme authority and influence, like a Vaush type almost. That's kind of what Murat actually was, a proto Vaush type, except he actually read books. At least you could say that for his part. It wasn't completely fat land whale like Vaush is. Like, so there was a little bit of improvement. But here's the thing: they both reached the same conclusions ultimately. and like they both fundamentally believe in like this idea, like sort of the Rousseauian, like man is inherently a good thing. We're inherently good animals, right? So
The
people
same
who
people that Rousseau said as he neglected all of his children. Like the same people that preached that mankind is inherently good ended up leading to governments that committed horrifying atrocities. Whereas if you actually have the humility enough to say, you know what, no, I'm a bad sinner, you're kind of less likely to want to lash out at other people who disagree with you.
it's also why monarchies in like pre like political like democratic age in Europe and America, right? You had more freedom under the German emperor than you do under the current like, Bundesrepublik of like Angela
North
Merkel.
Turkey.
Yeah, basically basically, right? Because like here's the thing, there's this misconception that like the monarch is just this all-imposing like dictator who it like has the time to micromanage like every single person in the kingdom. It's just
Or had
that's not
any
how
interest in
reality
doing so.
works. Yeah, he has no interest in doing so. And also, I think the bigger thing is like who's running the system. It's the Emperor of Germany. There isn't this invisible like cloud called the bureaucracy that really runs things like in this
I mean,
democratic.
you did have a fairly comprehensive bureaucracy by that point, also kind of largely built up by centuries of Prussian tradition. But there was still at least, the Kaiser did hold power. In Russia is kind of a better example. Yeah, the Tsar, for better or for worse, was the person in power. It's the thing is, the way I would describe monarchy is it's just honest. It's honest about, well, families are just kind of a natural inherent part of the human condition, and everybody from like Aristotle and Confucius could kind of understand this relationship, and it's like this just does seem like the most natural form of government. And it's like, isn't it interesting that like that was basically the form of government of most of of all the early civilizations.
It was absolute monarchy, or a sort of constitutional monarchy idea was the governing force of Western civilization
And
for
the thing is,
hundreds
mass
of years.
democracy was never a thing. Like the democracy, quote unquote, of Athens, Republic, the early Roman Republic. Whilst it may have been, for the people, the res publica, they always had a pretty good understanding of, okay, this is going to be like enfranchisement is for a select number of like landed men. And that was the early
Yes.
American Republic as well. Like none of the, I can't remember, or on Twitter, like somebody just posted a collection of like every single founding father saying why democracy is such an awful idea. Why no, we want republicanism. We do not want a mob rule.
No, exactly, because they understand
They
like,
don't want people to be able to use the demography as a weapon.
and that's what democracy actually is. It's just like it's mob rule essentially, and the more like of your guys you can import, you're gonna win the game no matter what essentially, and that's kind of what the left is doing, and they're winning very handily there. But like going back to monarchy for a quick second, the reason why it was better than democracy in the most simplest of terms is like there was accountability. You knew who ruled you. There wasn't like this like it's sort of like the way we have it in America right now, where it's like the only thing you know about the American government is Joe Biden is not running the American government. Who is? We have no clue, and that's terrifying. Like in the French monarchy, it's the French king ruling you. It's the first estate, right? First and second estate who's ruling you. There isn't this like nebulous idea of the assembly, the parliament.
That's
You know
somewhat elected or technically
Mhm.
elected, but not really.
Exactly, and like it has the shield called democracy, in which you voted for it, so nothing can be blamed, upon the people who are actually running the
Or I mean, at
system.
this point, it's just it's the shield where the progressives love to just think, okay, we're gonna use the language of like patriotism and loyalty, even though we don't believe in any of that. Like, oh, anybody that doesn't like anybody, it starts with anybody that likes their Confederate ancestors is a traitor, because even though Lincoln want it pushed for, reconciliation. They obviously think that, no, we need another excuse to punish old evil white men. But it's like anybody, on January 6th, evil traitor, or this is a threat to democracy. Don't you believe in democracy?
Yes, I love it when they say things like that, believe in democracy, because they actually do mean that in a sense.
And
Like,
believe in democracy, it just does. Obviously, what it means is whatever the ruling class,
whatever power says it means is what it actually means, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of this perfect, like Schmittian exception, right? Whatever the ruling class wants it to mean, right?
It's like, they just replace it. It's like you're against killing puppies, right? We're against killing puppies. You don't like killing puppies, do you, Anon?
Yeah, what's wrong with importing people? They're just like
are
you.
Are you a heretic?
It's like disconnected, like moralizing, almost like what the new atheists criticize, like this like sort of preaching kind of mentality.
Well, I mean, the new atheists were wrong is the fact that you're always going to have a religion. This is just
exactly.
This is just a religion that there's no salvation in. There's like this kind of vague, if you get more deep into it, like the Marxist kind of liberation, but there's no forgiveness. There's no salvation.
No, if you're guilty of the original sin of racism, which is what America is charged with, it's unforgivable.
Yep.
Essentially, by the progressives. You will never receive forgiveness for the
There
sin
is
of
nothing
racism.
you can do. There is no, and like there was never any victory condition, right? There is it is in a way like a death cult. It is basically turned into a death cult as well, like with the transgender and the. You look at the birth rates of these people, right?
It's abysmal, and like everywhere you look, where you see gay liberalism, it produces like shit results.
And it also,
everywhere.
yeah, it's not just about that they don't have children or form families. It's they actively go out of their way to harm children,
explicitly and implicitly in everything they do.
Mm-hmm.
Again, with destroying the nuclear family, destroying faith in community, like basically turning the state into like the parents with public schools, like like giving children TikTok when they're like 5 and their brains are still plastic, so we can program them to support gay marriage. It's just truly abominable things these people do.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason they have to do that, the reason they have to be so just debased and evil and like go after kids so much is because they don't reproduce.
Yeah,
progressivism doesn't reproduce.
These the TikTok teachers and all that want to trans the kids, they don't have kids themselves, or if they do, they already trans them, so they just have to get their hands on red American children.
Exactly. This is why they go after children so much, and why they push the LGBT alphabet stuff on people, because progressivism does not breed. It does not. Just like when you look at the numbers,
it's also easier in a way. It's if you mentally damage and scar a child like that, they're probably a lot easier to control because they can't act independently.
No, and like Lenin said it best: "Give me a child for 5 years, and I will plant the seeds which will never be uprooted." Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the mentality these people have, and I wish the right understood that to a greater extent. Now we're getting better. We understand like public schools are just indoctrination.
I mean, yeah. I think as we approach the end here, it's like, what did Orrin McIntyre get famous for? Is tap the sign. It's not rocket science, guys. These guys are evil and want to diddle kids.
Exactly. It's just like openly floating the point, which like you've like not the normies.
Why do drag queens need unrestricted access to children?
Why are there drag queens in public libraries that you pay for with your tax dollars? Is a great question, right? Why does that exist, right? But we don't have like government programs to support young people who want to start a family. You can't find that anywhere, but you can find resources to become a troon. That's what you can find with the current.
It's not even that. It's not even official government. It's you have all kids on social media, and it really honestly just works the exact way that they kind of said like drugs work, right? Like the peer pressure to use drugs. Well, everybody's doing it. Like everybody's taking HRT. You know, you want to be a cool victim, right? You know, you want to be part of the Rainbow Coalition. Well, you know, do this radical thing, become trans.
Yes, if you want to be cool, but I think there's also another
All your
thing.
friends on Discord who, you know, are totally not several years older than you and grooming you, you know, they have your best interest at heart.
Well,
It's
there's
really
also
why I think, you know, at the very least, nobody under the age of 13 should be given internet access.
yes, I think Uncle Ted had a great point about that. Especially, he had a great point. Although we don't endorse all his ideas on this channel,
No.
he did have a great point about just like having unambiguous like technology in your life, like
Mhm.
controlling you essentially, and becoming like less than human essentially as a danger, right? Which was kind of the big thesis for why he did the things he did. But it's also kind of like, well, you can be hacked essentially. You can be controlled by these things, and like the other side understands this very well, and we do not understand this very well. And that's the right doesn't understand power, the left understands power.
Partially it is
Essentially.
because there is the more moral side on the right of like, we not like normal well-adjusted people don't want to have this level of control over especially children, because first off, they're not, you know, they don't enjoy cheese pizza the way it seems a lot of these elites do. Like ordinary people aren't like that. But also just like ordinary people don't, I think uh it's this great thing. It's like I've heard this before, but it was like everybody on the right, we want strong men but not powerful men. And on the left, they want powerful men but not strong men. Like they don't, it's like they were bullied nerds in high school, and so they want to disenfranchise and disarm all this anybody that's has a hint of strength or self reliance to them, and they want the power. Whereas on the right, it's, you know, if you're self reliant enough and strong enough of a person, there isn't really a need to have powerful men rolling over you because you can roll over yourself in your own.
Yeah, like you're morally responsible and like, high enough like cohesion there in that society where it's not necessary to have a total, to borrow a phrase from Aaron McIntyre, total state, like total control, like to like manage this like degenerate, like, basically have nothing in common, like mass
Hmm.
populace, like basically gray goose soup that we have in America. Like as
And
much as we like
you even see that with the fashion, right? Is, you know, why do you think all the fashion seems to be trending towards women looking less feminine and more kind of androgynous? Like it literally is the joke of they're trying to weaponize femboys and just make that the norm, the beauty norm. So everybody is sterile, impotent, and androgynous.
Yes, and that's the goal for these people. They don't want anything that looks beautiful, or like moral or have an order to it. They hate that. They hate hierarchy and they hate nature and reality. Because again, I think somebody said it best: reality has a right wing bias, and that's why liberals don't like going outside, going
Mhm.
into nature. They don't like doing that. That's a very interesting thing I've noticed, actually.
I mean, there used to be the idea, like the stereotype of a liberal like 20 years ago was, oh, I like all the organic food and we need to protect nature. But like those ideas really kind of very easily fit into a right wing framework, and you know, eat the bugs and the goy slop chud, you know, fits actually very easily into a left wing one, especially if you have corporate interests there.
No, exactly. You went from these people being pro organic food, the Whole Foods, like farmers market type of thing, to where now it's like if you even like try to buy like non-pasteurized milk, they're gonna send the FBI to raid the farm because
Hmm.
they're so scared of anything that isn't like homogenized, essentially, right?
Hmm.
Anything organic that can make that's actually good for
And
you.
this
They're
has gone
scared.
back ever since the at least the Enlightenment, right? It's, you know, the natural, going against the natural law, going against, you know, the Christian morality that was existing in Europe at the time, when people like Rousseau and Voltaire were like, no, we know better. We know how humanity really should be, or not how it should. Humanity, even though there's no evidence to this, humanity it's just fundamentally good. Like, the natives, like the savage tribes, are really just all like completely peaceful, and before civilization, we were all living like this peaceful, like nudist colony, man. And like we just kind of have to like try and deconstruct everything. They love the word deconstruction, which really just means like we're just gonna take something apart because we have contempt for it, and we don't want to understand this. We already have our inherent bias against this beautiful like traditional thing. We just want to destroy it and give it an academic name.
No, they did that to pretty much everything in society. That's why they have to tear down statues, like remove gender.
Not even that, but like deconstructing the ideas of beauty as like heteronormative. Like, how many college classes have been about that?
I could think of at least like 20 off the top of my head. It's
But
also
yeah.
this other thing too about war on beauty, right? Where like in like basically like bikini model ads, right? They'll put an obese woman for Calvin Klein, right? Instead of like an attractive woman, right? Type of deal. Because that's fundamentally like beauty is fundamentally right wing. It's fundamentally pro order. It's not.
What the difference between the left and the right, I think, ultimately is that for the right, we believe that there's particularity, that like there are people that are a certain way and are not changeable. Say, like, if you want, you can take it, ethnically. Like, Germans are Germans and they're not Moroccans, and you can't like interchange the two. They're not interchangeable. Or like, if you are of royal or noble blood, you are part of this family or you're not. And it's the same thing with being particular about like your own family. It doesn't have to be nobility, but you're a member of your family, and that's specific about you, and you can't change that. The left has to view every human being as an interchangeable, like, meat suit that you can basically turn in. That's basically a character creator from a video game.
Yes, because we're all the same, right? We're all the same type of idea.
But yeah, I think because I kind of have to get going soon. But this has been a very good conversation. But just kind of talking about it, I think of one last thing about the legitimacy of the state. Going to the UK, because it's very obvious there that like Rishi Sunak, has signaled, apparently, if you've seen this, that he has an interest of going into the U.S. tech sector after his stint as prime minister is over. And if that's not a sign of the loyalty or what the people ruling us really think about ordinary people, that, you know what, I've done enough damage running the country. I'm just going to flee the country because I have no loyalty to it.
No, I saw that. It's the most like globalist, like technocratic ruling class managerial thing like ever. Pretty much encapsulated in one like article.
Urban cosmopolitans.
Yeah, decentralized, like derooted people that rule us. Like they're totally contemptible, type of thing. But I think we've kind of dragged this on for a little bit too long, Mr. Fritz. I've really enjoyed having you on for this conversation.
Yeah.
So, is there anything your audience you'd like to show for my audience? Any projects you have coming
up? I know I perennially come back once in a while, but I am going to try and make maybe at least an hour a week stream possible or available. I was thinking of I'm going to reorganize my kitchen. I might have said this either before the stream or before we started recording or afterwards, but I want to reorganize my kitchen, i.e. clean it, and hopefully start doing some cooking videos at some point, maybe. But I definitely want to try and at least, release some form of content on a regular basis again. So start looking out for that.
Definitely, and please go check out Mr. Fritz Imperial's channel. It'll be
you can just call me Fritz.
Mr. Fritz's channel. It's linked in the description. I highly recommend you check that out. And If you guys did enjoy this video, please like and subscribe. It's always appreciated. And have a good rest of your day. Peace.